Over the last few weeks, we have been going through this series or journeying through this series together about the good life. And so that may cause us to ask questions about what is this actual good life and how do I know I'm living life well? But what we've found as we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, we have found that we first have to look at really what our life is comprised of, what it makes up our life. And what we know is, in general, our life is made up of everything that we experience, the things that we think, say, and do. It's made up of all the jobs that we have, the jobs that we love, the jobs that we hate, the people that we meet, the people that we lose. It's made up of the homes that we build or the families that we create. So it's made up of a whole bunch of things, even the ebbs and flows in lives, the highs and lows of life. So we know life is very complex and made up of a whole bunch of things. But at the end of the day, when we reflect upon our life, and for many of us it may not be till the very end of life where we find or we determine this, or that we determine that we actually lived a good life. We know a lot of people around us will know of whether or not we squandered our life or whether or not we actually wisely used our life. Now, as followers of Jesus, and if you're not a follower of Jesus, you're still seeking, searching, I think what the Bible tells us is the good life is this. It says that the good life is succeeding in the things that matter the most. And again, some of us have disagreements with that. Some of us have some pushback to that and say, well, everything I do in life matters. And yes, your job matters. You creating your family matters. All of these things matter. But what matters the most in our life? And so we determined that Jesus tells us what matters the most in our lives is to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then to love our neighbor as ourselves. So the first part of this is our faith, right? That's important. Our relationship with God is important. It matters the most, right? It's the thing that needs to be the focal point for everything else that we do in life. But then in our how we love our neighbor, that is really in our character, right? Because out of our character, we do our conduct, right? So if our character is a certain way, we're going to act a certain way on the outside. And so our character is also important. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about very specifically some things that make up different aspects of these things that Jesus tells us matter the most in our life. And now to get into what we're talking about today, I want to start with a question. And here it is. What do you value the most? Now, you might be thinking that I'm looking for a specific answer. Maybe you're thinking, well, he's wanting me to say God, right? I'm going to kind of go in a kind of cheesy sort of way and lead us into this particular thing we're talking about today. But no, I don't expect you to answer God. I mean, there's a lot of things I think when we look at our life, and God may be the answer that you value the most. But there's probably a lot of other things in life, if you really take an honest look at your life, things that you value. But let's look at this question a little differently. Right? Of course, we might say, yes, this is what I value the most, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But let's ask this question to an outsider, maybe an outsider looking into your life. If that person were to come and they were to take an inventory of your life, what would they say that you value the most? Now, maybe they may look at your life, look at what you spend your time on, and they might say, well, this person is a person of family, right? They love their family, they care for their family, they value their family. And so they say, well, this person, they spend a lot of time with them. They're willing to go out of their way to be inconvenienced, to take them to sports, to take them to ballet lessons, to go play with them outside. Or that you value your spouse because you're always buying them flowers or you're always taking them out on dates. And so we look at this person's life and say, yes, they value them. And there's this overall sense that that person is willing to do whatever it takes to protect their family. So we see that they value their family, so that maybe something that you value. Or maybe it's our work. Someone on the outside looking in looks at your life and says, yeah, they travel a lot. They're always gone. They're not ever here. And sometimes that's good or bad. I mean, for some, they might have to travel a lot, but you may hate your job. But if someone knows that you value your job, they're like, oh, well, this person talks about with such passion about their job. The way they look at their job, they say, well, I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else but this job that I'm doing. So they see that you value your work. Or even our leisure, our physical activities, maybe going on vacations. People look at your life and they say, man, this family or this particular person, they are adventurous, right? They're always going on exotic vacations. They're always doing all of these sort of adventurous things. And so they value that, right? That's something that's important to them. But then there's even wisdom and knowledge. Some things that we value. And that's not to say that none of us value learning things or knowing things. But there are particular people in the world and in our lives that really value this stuff because they maybe love reading books, they love reading articles, they love researching, they love doing all of these kinds of things. My wife, for example, I take her for an example. You go look at her bank statement and you're going to find that there's probably a lot of Kindle purchases, or you might look at my email that says there's a book that's on loan or something like that. So she loves reading, right? So she highly values wisdom. She highly values the knowledge. Now, maybe it's likely that someone from the outside looking in may be able to tell what it is that you value. But some say that if we take a look at your bank statement, like I mentioned earlier, if we take a look at your bank statement, what we'll find what you value. You might look at my bank statement and you might find a lot of purchases from Running Warehouse, which is where I buy my running shoes from. I love running. So you look at that and say, Mark really values running. And you might go to my shoe closet and find, there is, I don't have a shoe closet, but a shoe rack, and you'll find Mark values running. And so you can see that from a bank statement. You can see it how people conduct their lives. But maybe that doesn't quite get to the heart of the issue or the core of what it is that you really value. Maybe there are other things that we have to ask, other questions that we got to ask to probe deep into this. But I think no matter, even if none of these things are things that you value the most, hopefully you value your family, but you look at work, leisure, knowledge, and say, well, I don't really value those things in my life. And so maybe these things aren't describing your life. But other things that we might value, I think, are all go to the same place. Everything that we value in life is a pursuit, ultimately, of our happiness. Ultimately, everything that we value in life can be categorized under this one main heading of happiness. Everything we do in life, the things that we value, the things that we make time for, the things that are priorities in our lives, those things, I hope, if they're a priority in your life, those are the things that you love. Those are the things that you value. But ultimately, they're all headed for the same goal of happiness. And that's the American ideal. The American ideal, as we know, is we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that is the sort of Western ideal that a lot of us are ingrained with from very early on, right? That we have the right to be able to pursue these kinds of things. A famous philosopher once said this, Blaise Pascal. He says, all men seek happiness. This is without exception. Whatever different means they employ, they all tend to this end. The cause of some going to war and of others avoiding it is the same desire in both, attended with different views. The will never takes the least step but to this object. This is the motive of every action of every man, even of those who hang themselves. And now he's not particularly this doesn't really end in a really happy sort of sense. But what he's really getting at is that everything that we do, whether it's for good or whether it's for bad, a lot of these things that we're doing seem to be headed towards that same direction or that pursuit, ultimately, of happiness. And now it doesn't take long for you to figure out that everything around us is trying to get us to be happier, right? You watch TV for any amount of time, you see all these infomercials that come in talking about the next best product that's going to make your life easier, it's going to make you less stressed out, less frustrated, and it's actually going to make you happy. Or you think of all these commercials of a new car, a new house, or maybe there's a different thing that you can purchase that's going to make your life easier, that's going to make you happier. Or even an ideal family. So we look at all these things, and all of these things are trying to say, if you have this thing in your life, you can be happier. And all we have to do, if we maybe don't agree with that, all we have to do is look at our own life. That everything we're doing is for our happiness. You woke up this morning to feed yourself. Right? That's one of the first things that you do, or you take a shower, but you go and you feed yourself, and you say, well, that's to sustain me, right? That's to keep me alive. But if you go for any amount of time without food, you get what we call hangry, right? You get a little angry because you're hungry. And so if you eat and you're satisfied, then you're a happier person to be around, hopefully a happier person to be around. And so we feed ourselves to make ourselves happy. We buy things for ourselves to make us happy. We go out and make more money so we can have a stable family, which hopefully will make us happy, and then to also have a means to buy other things, invest in other things, which will make us happy. So all of the things, even at the most basic level, we're trying to make ourselves happy. But there's an even deeper question we have to ask. like, are we ever truly happy when we have all of the things that we are asked or told to pursue in this world for happiness? Are we truly happy? What I find is that even though we pursue all of these things are good things, I should add. When we pursue all of these things, we're asking them to do something for us that they can't do for us. Whether that's our family, whether that's our work, whether that's our money, whether it's our power, our position, our intelligence, wisdom, and knowledge, like going to school, like all of these things, they're great pursuits. But they cannot provide the ultimate fulfillment and contentment and happiness that we need in our life. Because in each of these areas, there's always this desire for more. Like, yeah, my family is stable, my family's pretty good, but we could be better. You know, I have some money here, but I think I can make more if I do this. You know, or I'm working at this job, and this is an okay job. It was better than my last job, but I think I can find another job that maybe can get me more promotions. And again, there's nothing bad about doing any of these things. The problem is that we're asking those things to fulfill us. We're asking those things to bring us happiness, because we think once we attain those things, I'll be happy, I'll be content. We know that's never the case. And that's really what Jesus is going to get to the heart of today, of what we're talking about today, is that we seek all of these, as he calls, earthly treasures. Right? Not just money, not just wealth, not just things, but a pursuit of other things in this world. He knows that it's an issue for us, a problem for us, to go after those things to bring fulfillment and contentment in our life. When in fact, the only person who can bring fulfillment and contentment into our life ultimately is God himself. And that's what Jesus is really getting to the heart of what passage we're reading today. And so if we go there, here's what Jesus tells us. Jesus says that do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So he starts out, and he already says, okay, do not store up for yourselves. Stop storing up for yourselves treasures on earth. Because ultimately what's going to happen is, like, even though all these things are going to pass away, we still pursue them. We pursue them with all of our heart. We want them to bring us contentment, fulfillment, and happiness, but they were never meant to do that. So Jesus says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. These things that we pursue, those things will rule our life. Those things will push us away from God if we allow them to. Because we don't keep God in his proper place at the very center or at the very top of our life. We pursue all these other things instead. And so Jesus knows this would be a struggle for us. And so I think when he tells us this thing that, you know, where our treasure is, there our heart will be also, or he says, don't store up yourselves treasures on earth, that you can't serve both God and money, that you can't have two masters. Because there's got to be one thing in our life that is going to be the focal point of it all, and only one thing in our life that's ultimately going to bring contentment to our life, and give us a different perspective and how we view all these different pursuits that we go after in life. Now, one thing that I think we see here, and how we are going forward with this good life, as I think what really Jesus is getting at here, is that the good life is a contented life. Right? This is one of the things that I think Jesus is really trying to get at the heart at here, is that our life, if we're living a good life, is going to be a life of contentment. Now, I think, again, the heart of Jesus' words is, I think he's also trying to get us to ask another question. And he's asking us this, or encouraging us, inviting us to ask this, but why do we seek to store up treasure on earth? Now, it's evident from our life that we believe we're permanent residents of this earth. So we buy big houses, we buy nice cars, we try to get, the best job, we try to have some notoriety in life. So we do all of these things in an attempt to build something up for us. Right? That's the goal of life. And so when Jesus asks this, he's encouraging us to ask this question of ourselves, like, why do we do that? I mean, there's probably many reasons we can guess as to why we do that. But I think the first of these is it builds up some kind of security. Right? This is probably the most important part of all of this, is that we think that as we build up things here on earth, that we are building a security for us. We're building stability for us. If we have a good job and we have a good family and all that thing, it's going to make us happy, make us content, and we'll get pretty good way through life, right? Pretty problem-free, maybe trouble-free, maybe. So security. Or we think of power. And this can be a good or bad thing. If we believe that accumulating things or pursuing all these things in earth is going to give us some sense of power, like control over people, or maybe even control over life, right? We might be in for a rude awakening with probably both of those things. And even independence. We could get to a place in our life where we've accumulated all of these things and say, or money or position or power, whatever the case might be. We get there and we say, God, I don't need you, or I don't need anybody else. And even pleasure. If you have a means to attain whatever you want, like if you have all the money that you could ask for, then any fantasy that you have, you can bring that to fruition, right? You can bring it to reality if you have the means and the money to be able to do that. So pleasure. And even worth and value. Right? We look at all these things and we think that they provide some kind of worth and value to us. And I think this is the problem that Jesus has with it. With all the things we accumulate, all the pursuits that we have in life, when we ask these things to do something for us that they were never meant to do, that's when we get in trouble. Because I don't think Jesus really has a problem with us getting a job to provide some stability, working on our families to make sure that they're stable, or having some sense of power, right, over life, right? We maybe have some sense of control, but ultimately we don't have full control because some things happen that are out of our control, but yet we want to have some sense of it. So yeah, I think it's okay to try to do that. And even independence, right? We don't want to go through life having to live off of somebody else, and we want to be on our own, be our own person. I don't think Jesus has a problem with that. And even pleasure. Right? I mean, yeah, Jesus wants us to enjoy life. I mean, he wants us to go out. Yeah, if you want to have fun with your family, if you want to go on exotic vacations, like great, that's fantastic. Like I don't think that's the problem. The problem is this very last thing. The problem is that we look at a lot of these things and we ask them to provide worth and value to us. Now, if we have a great job, like that job is the thing that defines who we are, or the money we have defines who we are, the position and power we have defines who we are, or our families define who we are. And so that's what he's getting at. He's saying, ultimately, those things can't do that. Ultimately, those things can't bring you fulfillment, contentment, and happiness. Right? Only he can. And now I think I should clarify, when you look at some of these things, when we think of something like independence, for example, when we say like, yeah, I don't think it's the attitude of, well, God, I can do this without you, right? I think that's the bad part of this. But I think practically speaking, if you're thinking, well, I want to be able to live on my own and do my own thing, well, that's great. And I think if you have the means to do that, I think that's awesome to be able to do that. And I don't think that's where the problem is. So I just wanted to clarify that before we kind of move on. But again, going back to the worth and value, that is where the issue is for Jesus. That's the issue he has with our pursuits here on earth, because we're pursuing them for something deeper than they can actually provide for us. And now Jesus isn't the first person to say this. He isn't the first person to bring up this particular issue. We go back to the book of Ecclesiastes, and I quoted this a couple weeks ago, but I think in this particular passage what we find is that King Solomon was a man who had a lot of things, but his assessment of life seems kind of pessimistic. And so here's what he says. He says, the words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Now we read this and think, okay, this is very pessimistic to look at life. But Solomon wasn't being pessimistic. He was being realistic. He looks at all of life, all of its pursuits, and says it's meaningless. But we have to take a step back and try to understand what he's saying. So when it says meaningless, I want you to think of a candle. Now, if you, as a kid, I don't know if you did this when you were a kid, but as a kid, when my mom would light a candle, she would blow out the candle, you see the smoke come up. And as a kid, I would think it was fun to try to grab it. I could see the smoke, I could smell the smoke, and I'd try to grab it, but I couldn't grab it. And then eventually that smoke just fades away. You don't see it anymore. You don't smell it anymore. And I think that's the parallel that Solomon's trying to make with life, that it's not necessarily meaningless. On their own, they're meaningless. But they're not necessarily meaningless, but that they are, in fact, things that we cannot control, right? Things about life we can't control. The pursuits in life that we have, we can't control them either, even though we do what we can to pursue them with all of our hearts. And life itself is something that's here, and then it is gone. And so he's being realistic about life. And he's saying that solely these pursuits can't provide us what we think they can. Only God. That's what he's going to conclude at the end of his book. Is that the only thing we can conclude about life is that it's best lived with God at the center. And he challenges us, right? He says, what do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? What do you have to show for life? At the end of the day, at the end of your life, what do you have to show for it? Now we have to understand that Solomon is speaking from the perspective of someone who has everything. He has all the money in the world, all the power in the world. He could get any woman he wanted. He could realize any fantasy that he wants. And he grew up the most powerful man, the most wise man in his time. So he had all of these things, and I like to look at him as someone who's climbing this ladder of success, this ladder of happiness. He gets to the top, but he has the grace to look back down to us and say, look, there is nothing to be found up here. So for us here in America, or wherever you're listening to this from, if you're in the West or over in China, wherever you might be, you look at whatever your culture is asking you to do, or whatever pursuits it's asking you to do. What Solomon's telling us here is that you can keep pursuing those things all of your life. You're going to get to the top of the ladder. You're going to get there. You're going to realize that there's nothing to be found. There's no fulfillment. There's no contentment. Because on their own, they cannot provide for us something that only God can. It's almost as if we get to that top ladder and we're like, man, this isn't enough. I want more. And we want to add more to this ladder, try to get up more and more and more to the top. But Solomon says, no. That is not a worthwhile pursuit. There's nothing to be found there. Because they cannot provide you the contentment and fulfillment only God can do for you. That's what Solomon is getting at. And we also have to understand what Jesus is getting at here as well. What perspective he's speaking from. He's speaking from a perspective of someone who knows that his disciples would struggle with this issue. And he knows that we ourselves as followers of Jesus and as people just in the world, whether you're religious or not, this is something we're going to struggle with as well. That we're going to keep pursuing all of these things in the world and thinking they're going to provide for us something that they cannot. That ultimate fulfillment, that ultimate contentment that we're all searching for, all that we all desire deep down inside. Jesus says, like 10 chapters later from this particular conversation, here's what he says. He says, what good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? So he's kind of going back to the beginning of really what matters the most. That we are squandering our life if we are investing in all of these pursuits solely for what they can do for us. He's going back to the beginning saying, okay, what matters most is your relationship with God and then how you treat other people. But in this case here, it's our relationship with God. We've squandered life when we just pursue these things, and yet at the same time as we're pursuing those things, we're neglecting the greater relationship, which is with God. And then we, at the end of the day, at the end of our life, we forfeit our soul. And so Jesus knows it's going to be a struggle for us. He knows this was a struggle not just for his disciples, but even throughout the ages and even up to our time. And it will continue to be a struggle for our kids, our grandchildren, and generations that come after us. That they're going to struggle with pursuing the things of this world instead of focusing in on the thing that truly matters is our relationship with God. It's interesting that we invest so much time, on this earth. Or we invest so much time in the pursuits on this earth. And we're only here for 80 years, 90 years. I don't know what the average sort of time frame is for someone to be alive. But we invest so much in all of these pursuits. If you're a follower of Jesus, this world is not or at least this life right now is not the permanence. Right? We're permanent citizens right now of this life. The 80 or 90 years that we live on this world is just a small sliver of the rope So if we take a rope from one end of this church building to the other, and that represents eternity, only really one strand of that rope represents really the time that we spend here on this earth. And even though that's a small part of time, we invest so much in the pursuits. And even though we know deep down inside that those things cannot provide for us what only God can, we still continue to pursue those things. And so God knows, Jesus knows, that we'll struggle with this particular thing. And now we got to ask ourselves another question. At the end of the day, maybe at the end of our life, or whenever we decide to take an inventory, what we have to ask is this particular question is, are my pursuits in their proper place? The things that I value, the things that I make time for, the things that are a priority in my life, are those things in their proper place? And to answer that, all you have to do is look at your life. Maybe you look at your work. You're spending endless hours, you're working at this job, and maybe you're not getting paid enough. Maybe you feel like, man, I could be more fulfilled if I had a different job. But you work these endless hours at this job, and you're sacrificing maybe the time with your family, or you're sacrificing the most important relationship that we could have in this life, which is our relationship with God. Or maybe you look at the relationships that you have in your life. A lot of people in our world put so much stock in actual physical relationships. Things that they are putting their hope in, things that they hope are going to bring worth and value to their life, things that are going to bring significance to their life, or bring fulfillment and contentment into their life. But the fact is, in reality is that people do fail us. People aren't perfect. And if we are putting all of our stock and all of our eggs in the basket of relationships, or in the basket of work, or of money, of power, position, we're going to be hopeless. Because these things will fail us. And Jesus tells us to reiterate what he says. These things will be destroyed. These things will pass away. These things will fade away. But yet we put so much trust in those things. And we look at the rest of our life and all the things that we pursue to try to gain some kind of significance, some kind of confidence, or some kind of worth and value. All of these things in life, we know deep down that they're never going to provide for us what only God can provide for us, which is that ultimate contentment and that ultimate fulfillment that each and every one of us is looking for. Now, I should clarify, that God doesn't want you to not be happy. I think that thing is clear from the Bible, that it's not that he wants you to have a miserable life. He wants you to enjoy life, but he wants you to make sure that your values, what you value, what's most important to you, your pursuits, are in their proper place. That ultimately, at the end of the day, that we're not seeking worth and value and contentment and fulfillment from these things that we pursue, but we're only looking for that specifically from God. Because God is the only one who can give us that. He's the only one that can fulfill that desire within us as we seek and pursue all of these things in sort of this endless cycle that we go through in life. And so the only thing that remains constant in the ebbs and flows of life and the ups and downs of life is God. The only one who doesn't change when everything around us crumbles or everything around us fails, that's God. And because God never changes, why not we take this, or why he never fails us, why not take this opportunity to put our trust in him? Because I think we know deep down that he's the only one in the universe that can provide for us what we've been searching for our entire lives. Let's pray. God, thank you so much that you love us, that you care for us, that you provide this ultimate contentment and fulfillment in our life. We're thankful that we don't have to keep striving in this world, pursuing after all these things and trying to find our worth and value in them, that you can provide that for us. We know, Lord, that at the end of the day, and maybe we know this, but yet we still keep striving, we know that they can't provide for us that fulfillment and contentment. Because we get there, we attain what it is we think we desire, we get there and we're like, man, I want more. But we know, we should know, and we should realize that these things can't do what only you can do for us. So I pray, Lord, that you would, for each of us, that you would come into our lives, that you would reveal yourself afresh in our lives, and show us how you are the only one that can provide that fulfillment and contentment for each and every one of us, and for each and every one of those things that we deeply desire and pursue in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.